Hi and welcome to another YouTube video. In today's video we're going to talk about a lot of different things, so I have marked them all below in the timeline so that you can skip to the points that really interest you. But in general we're going to talk about Reshade because I made some Reshade presets of my own that I want to give you for download, and also I want to show you how you can make Reshade presets that fit your own needs and you can customize them for whatever build you want to make look amazing. And also I want to go in a little bit more depth later about what the different things that Reshade can actually do. But first of all, what is Reshade and how can you get it? Well, those questions I recommend to you this video by my good friend Paul Pancake, and he explained it perfectly. I learned it that way, so it would be like kind of weird for me to explain that too. So if you don't have Reshade yet and you want it, then go ahead, check out that video, and we're good to go. So first, before we talk about the more complicated stuff, I want to present to you my own Reshade presets. I have picked 6 different ones that I put up for download in the description, and yeah, those 6 different Reshade presets that I made all have very different purposes, and I also conveniently named them after their purpose. So the first image you can see here of my abandoned Victorian mansion, by the way, I can also link that. There are going to be so many links in the description. But yeah, the first picture that you're seeing is the version without Reshade, so that's just like the normal blend game. And the second, the first Reshade preset that I have for you is my gameplay reshader. So I always use that when I'm building, when I do normal gameplay, and it's pretty easy on the hardware. It doesn't slow down your PC as other Reshade presets do. It doesn't blur out the different menus, you can see all of them fine, but it still makes the game look just a little bit more vibrant and crisp. The second one was originally made for interior screenshots, but I have to say this one is kind of an all-rounder. It can do basically everything. The reason why I made it for the interior is because a lot of the other Reshade presets have a lot of blur in the backgrounds, but in the interior that kind of like defeats the purpose of wanting to show off that room when you can only see the items that are in the front and the rest of the room is very blurry. So yeah, this one doesn't have as much like depth blur and everything is kind of clear, but still it has like some more effects on it than the gameplay Reshade. Okay, and this next Reshade preset that I have for you is actually made for these types of like cursed abandoned builds like this Victorian is, and yeah, you can really see how it darkens it all up and it adds these like little effects like they are in old movies oftentimes, which gives that kind of horror vibe, even though it's not too much that the quality of these screenshots is really like diminished. No, it still shines, it still shows off the build. It just has this atmosphere and vibe that's kind of like in the spooky horror direction. And in general, for the exterior of builds, I have 2 different ones in the download pack, and the first one is my soft exterior Reshade, and this one isn't like as focused on like the shades and the shading. It more brings out the bright colors in the build and makes them shine, so it's very bright and a very like light focused Reshade that makes everything feel kind of like soft, and I really like to use this one for more magical builds, while the next one, the crisp exterior Reshade, that one has more like defined shades and kind of makes the build stand out from the background and gives it this like nice shape and just makes it look more realistic. So I also really like the crisp exterior Reshade. And now last but not least is the Reshade preset I usually use for sim screenshots. So you can see here it didn't really recognize the roof of the build. The roof is kind of blurred, so this is not the field of expertise for this Reshade, but I'm going to show you all of them in some more examples later so you can see it shine in the area it is meant for. Okay, so the next example shot is one of an interior screenshot, and you can kind of see all of them next to each other and compare them to each other. So this is a different field of screenshot, the interior shots, and in this category, the one that is made for this, the Sunny Interior Reshade, really shines. I really like the result of that one, but I also have to say, because this is such a bright room, the Sunny Soft Exterior really looks like kind of cool and magical, as I said, and the Sim Screenshot Reshade is also doing a very good job here, even though it kind of makes half the room blurry, and I don't really like that for interior shots. And if you like this room and are interested, this one is for the build, from the build that I made for my last shell challenge, so I'm also going to link that video in the description. And this next picture to compare all of them in is this one of my cottagecore dream house, and this one isn't spooky at all, so I also picked this one so that it isn't as similar as the one at first that was meant for the spooky reshade. And with this one, the focus is of course on the crisp exterior reshade and the soft exterior reshade, and they really bring out different characters in the build, even though I have to say in this one I like the crisp exterior version the best. And the last one for these different reshade presets is a one of a sim, so a sim screenshot, so you can probably think that I like the version for sim screenshots the best, because it kind of blurs out the background in a way that the flowers that were there in the background have this hexagonal shape, and I kind of really like that because it frames this character, this figure very well. And yeah, I like this as a photographic effect because the character that I photographed has kind of a darker style. I also like the spooky reshade here, and also the crisp one is doing a kind of good job, but for both of them I don't really like the color scheme as well as I do for the sim screenshot one. Okay, so now let's get to the easy explanation how you can make a new reshade preset. So on my keyboard it is Shift and F2 that you need to press to get to this menu. It's kind of like the reshade menu. So at the moment I have chosen the Sunny Gameplay Reshade. For me it's called Sunny Gameplay 2, but I'm going to change the name before I'm going to put it up for download, so it kind of makes a little bit more sense. And so if I go to the very first thing, for me it's called Sunny because that's what I chose when I installed it. For you it could have any other name, but for me the very first thing is just like no reshade preset, just like the bland way the game looks. So you're going to choose that when you want to make a new reshade preset, and then I'm going to have to look that I don't hide this one a bit behind my camera. So okay, so now you have chosen this like a bland reshade, and now you need to press plus, and you can give like any name like this, and now you just can scroll through this and you see nothing is ticked on. And now what you can do is you look at your builds, let's see, like what is a good position? Like this. You can still see the bit on top very well like this. And now you go through and you tick on these different boxes, and you can see like which one of those like enhances the way that the build looks and which one maybe makes it a little bit worse. And then you can add like some shading and stuff. You don't really have to know a lot about these to make your own custom reshade preset. You just need to go through them and kind of find out for yourself which one makes the game look better for you and which one doesn't, or for that specific build, and then you're basically good to go. But now let's say you've got something like this filmic pass where you think like, oh, this like color is super nice and I like it, but I don't want it in this intensity as it is right now. So then you kind of like shift to these boxes down here, and you're going to scroll through them. So you know it's called a filmic pass, so you scroll through till you find the letter F, filmic path. There it is. So you just scroll through until you find the one with the same name as the effect that you liked but don't want in that intensity. And then there's a lot of stuff here that you can play with, but the main thing when you want that effect just a little bit less intense, you go to strength, and and then you pull that down a little bit, so you still get that effect that you liked, but not as intense, so you can still see like the original colors. And then there are other things here that you can change, like the fade. You can see what that does. So you don't need to know beforehand what everything that you do does. Like, also, if you make a reshade and then you realize, okay, now the game looks a little bit worse than before, then you can just like delete this reshade and start a new one, but still in the process you have learned a few things and you kind of get a feeling for what does. So here's like the contrast that you can play with, the linearization, whatever that does, and bleach. So like lots of different fun things that you can play with, like very fun things. I probably shouldn't play with that too fast, or some people could get like nauseous. So yeah, this is definitely not a good look, but that's something that you can do with Reshade, just with that one thing with Filmic Pass. And so there's a lot of depth that we can go in, and then that we're going to go into next. But for this section, I just wanted to encourage you to play around. It's no problem at all if you don't know what everything does. Just play around and see which one you like. And if you don't like something, just press minus and it says, do you really want to remove this preset? Then you can say yes, and then you're back to a normal reshade. Okay, so now let's go a little bit more in depth and see what these different parts are doing. So let's go just make a new one and start with the first one, which is Adaptive Sharpen. So what Adaptive Sharpen is, not just in Reshade but also in something like Photoshop, it's like a sharpening shader that kind of ignores sharp edges and flat areas and only sharpens areas or edges that are blurry. So it just kind of focuses on the areas where it's really needed, and it does the same thing here in Reshade. So it kind of like, yeah, sharpens blurry edges, and here you can see the different like also things that you can still change. This is like the amount of sharpening that it does, because from a certain point of sharpening it kind of looks like crizzly. I don't know how to describe it, but there are these like little dots appearing when you sharpen too much. So with this one you can kind of like control the amount of sharpening that has to be done. Okay, and the next one is colorfulness, which is a little bit more self-explanatory, and it just makes the image more colorful. It also has these sliders here, so if you put it up, it's like super bright and colorful. And then if you tone it down a little bit, you find that like sweet spot, which is just like very beautiful, but not like screaming in your face with color. And then when you put it down, it can also take away the colorfulness and turn it into a black and white picture. We also have Lim Luna, and also if you don't like remember what anything does, you can always hover over an area and it's going to explain to you what this one does. So if we put this up, it kind of changes the dynamic, and yeah, it kind of allows for more or less clipping. And that's already enough about colorfulness. The next thing is vibrance. That also doesn't do that much at this state, but if we put it up or down, you can see like the colors changes. They become like very vibrant or not vibrant depending on where you go on this scale. So I think it was like around 0.7 naturally, and here you can separately change the RGB balance. So this one should be the amount of red in the colors. So if you put this up, it's starting to get very red, and if you put it all the way down, the red is pretty much gone, even though some of the green things are orange now, so everything is kind of flipped. So be careful with what you can do with this, but you can actually do a lot with this, so it's pretty interesting. And now this one should be like a green or like yellow, but like green. So if we pull it down, the red colors become green and the green colors become red. If we put it up, the green becomes very, very green. And I think it was like about there. And now the blue balance. So there isn't really a lot of blue in this picture, but if you put it all the way down, like up, the areas that were like slightly blue become very, very blue, and if you put it down, everything else becomes blue, basically. So this is definitely pretty fun to play with and can also do a lot, and you can like create very alien landscapes with playing with this vibrance. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is DPX, which is an effect often also used for post-production in like film and TV, and also a specific type of file that some cameras record in, because this one kind of saves all of the different color channels in 32-bit, so it kind of has more natural contrast. You probably aren't interested in most of that, but like what it does is it amps up the contrast basically, and it does that naturally, which is very nice for film. But in this one, you can see that if you put it to 0, the contrast is the highest, and if you put it up, the contrast is kind of lessened. So here you can, but also change the saturation and the colorfulness and the strength. So yeah, again, a lot of stuff that you can do with it, but at least in film, DPX is used for something else. I don't think it's that serious here, but yeah. A lot of crazy stuff also that you can do with this, especially if you familiarize yourself with these options down here. Okay, and now let's get this mess away and talk about this next one, which in my opinion is the most important one and the one that changes the most, like it's a literal game changer, and it's the MXAO effect, which stands for Marty McFly Ambience Obscurance, and it's an algorithm that kind of pre-processed the indirect lighting, and the effect of that is that you can see these beautiful shadings around the different objects in the game, which is so nice, and the base game shaders are kind of lacking in shade, so this one really does a lot and is super powerful. But if it's too powerful for you, you can always search for it down here, and here you can kind of like take it away or give it more strength, and yeah, just more ambient occlusion amount it is called here. And again, if you hover over it, it also like says what it does. And then you have the indirect lighting amount, and another one which is pretty important to mention is the sample radius, which kind of changes how like sharp the shadow is or how blurred out the shadow is. So playing around with this one also changes a lot. And I'm going to talk about the next two together because they kind of do the same. The first one is fast approximate anti-aliasing, and the other one is morphological anti-aliasing. So what they do is they smooth out the edges. So because you are working with reshade, and if you want something like the depth haze or the blurry depth perception to work, you need to put out the anti-aliasing, so the like smoothing of edges that the game does itself. So you can see if it is off, it kind of has this stair effect where there are the different steps, and if you put on one of those, it smooths out those edges. So they kind of do the same. I kind of prefer the morphological anti-aliasing, so yeah, just for your information, but both of them work fine. And these were some of the main ones where there is a lot to talk about. The other ones are somewhat a little bit more self-explanatory, or just don't have that much depth behind them. Like clarity makes the dark portions of the image more dark, while making the light ones more light. And curves also kind of changes the way that the colors look, but in a very subtle and natural way. And then filmic pass is the one that we talked about earlier, that can give yourself like an overlay that can make your screenshot appear in a different color scheme and just like overlay it with different colors. In this case, they chose this kind of like rosy red, and levels is also very interesting. It also changes the colors to be more vibrant, more saturated, and also gives you a lot of opportunities to work with them down in this box here. So this adjusts the shadows, but only the shadows for the different RGB colors. So what you could do is you could have very blue shadows, and then you could have very red highlights. That would be great, but because The Sims doesn't have very like natural highlights and shadows, it basically only has highlights and not as many shadows, this one just doesn't work as well. It kind of could work better if you put also on the MXAO. And now you can see a little bit more of the blue shadows, but I think in general that doesn't work too well here. But Adaptive Fog is very, very cool, and I really like to use it because it kind of recognizes automatically which is the foreground and which is the background, and then it adds this layer of light in the background, and I think it just looks stunning. I wish the Adaptive Fog was a little bit more darker and blue, because that's what a lot of landscapes do when you look like deep into them. They don't necessarily always, like, it depends on the weather, but they don't necessarily always get like very white and washed out, but sometimes also like darker and very blue. First, I want to put up the amount of blue that is in there, and now you can see it has this kind of like purpley color, so it's take away a little bit of the red, and now we have this very, very blue color, like this. So very, very dark blue now that is overlaying here. And now oh god, now you can see like really what it does. So it kind of overlays this deep blue that we've chosen, and it kind of like sees where the background is and it puts it there. So it's kind of cool that we chose this extreme color because it really shows what this one does, but we don't want the max factor, we just want it kind of like there. So it's and now the curve, so if you put it to 0 there's no fog whatsoever, and if you put it higher it kind of takes away more and more of the foreground. It's very interesting. The fog start is like how deep it goes like down the image. I think this is actually pretty cool. So if you now put this down, all of this kind of has this blue effect. So this one is like very, very deep and cool in my opinion. And then you have the bloom that kind of decides how dark and how light it is. The bloom power, so like a lot of interesting things that you can do with this, and it's one of my favorite things to play with, to be honest. Now we don't need to talk that much about something like color matrix, where you can change the main color of the build, you can give it another color, and this one, Advanced CRT, is kind of like this fun effect, but you rarely are going to use this one in your actual like screenshots. It's kind of as if you look through a window in a car or a bus that has these things against flies in front of them, and everything has this like weird effect. I don't really like it, to be honest. Daltonize also takes away a lot of the color, but in a kind of interesting way. So if you want something that is pretty desaturated, you could choose Daltonize and leave it like this, but play with the options, and you can get very, very nice desaturated effects. And denoise is kind of taking away some of that like sharpness, some of the sharp edges, and kind of blends together some of the nearer options. So it's a very specific kind of blur, you could say, and this one just adds this like entire blur about like around the entire canvas, and not just in the specific areas, and blurs it with the nearest partners like the other one does. Depth Haze does a lot of the same stuff that the Adaptive Fog did, so I'm not going to go into detail, but these two do some of the same things and in pretty interesting and different ways, so definitely go and check those out and see what you can do with it, because it's pretty fun to play with. Display depth is not for you to use, basically. This is more of a function for the PC to know which is the foreground, which is the background, to make some of the other reshade ones work, at least as far as I know. I'm of course am no expert. I just give you the parts of information that I have gathered so far, and some of that could be wrong. But yeah, now let's go to the depth of field stuff. Depth of field means you can control, like in The Sims, it means that you can control with the mouse which parts of the image you want to be sharp and which ones you don't want to be. So your mouse is always the focus of the sharpness, and this one is the ring one, which I don't use as often. I really like to use the magic depth of field. It's got a very nice effect in my opinion, and there's also this one with a lot of numbers and letters, but this one is a little bit too extreme for me, especially in the background here. And this one, the Mezzo DOF, is also, I think, pretty cool. I use this one for the sim screenshots. Emphasize makes everything black and white, but then you can choose specific colors that you want to be vibrant. So like these images that are black and white, but someone is holding a rose and only the top of that rose is very, very vibrantly red. This is the kind of stuff that you can do with Emphasize, if I remember correctly. Film grain is an effect. I don't think you can see it well here on camera, but what it does is it adds this little grainy effect that some of older film cameras had. I think you can see it better with film grain too. Maybe, yes, here you can see a little bit of these effects. You don't really want that in your usual screenshots, but I really like to use that in my horror spooky screenshots. And now Fine Sharp is just another sharpening overlay for nice and sharp edges. Here you have another depth of field. One, it's the Marty McFly depth of field, and I think this one is also very advanced and very cool. So I'm mostly, for normal ones, I use the Magic or the Marty McFly ones. Then we have another one that just sharpens. If you feel like you sharpen too much, or you want a very close-up look of the face of Sim and you want it all to be very smooth, you can choose Gaussian blur, but I personally don't like that for exterior shots. And this one is another one that really sharpens, but also puts on contrast and lighting and saturation, all different kinds of stuff. This is high pass sharpen, so it only sharpens specific areas. HQ4X is kind of a blur effect. It's a pretty advanced blur effect that kind of stays in specific areas and only blurs within them, but I also don't use it that often, so I don't know that much about it. And another sharpening mode, ambient light, is something that I really like. It kind of adds these exterior light sources and gives, where the light hits, it has this kind of blur and the colors changes, and I think that's a very cool thing. Here you have some more depth of field things, but these ones aren't the ones that you control with your mouse. These ones are automatic ones, which is why the first one is called autofocus. So you can kind of imagine, and if you do these cinematic camera tours, it kind of changes automatically. That in some cases can work super well, but in also some other cases you can't see anything because it shows this one weird flower in the foreground to be the only thing that is sharp now, and then you can see anything of the build and you can't change it because it's automatic. So yeah, that's what these ones does. There is another one that sharpens, so there are a lot of these. And now we got the bloom. And with the bloom you can do a lot of different things. Most of the blooms here just make the light areas lighter to kind of give it less glowing and nice lighting effect. This one also has kind of an awareness of the colors around it. And you can see, because this one is so blue, and especially because we chose this like very blue background, it kind of brings together the lighted areas and like portrays them in this specific color. But you also have the magic bloom, which is more white focused, and you can also make it monochrome. This is an easy way to make your screenshot black and white if you don't want to play with the color sliders or the sliders down there, because that can get complicated pretty fast. And you also have motion blur. We can't really see that here because we have like a steady picture, but if you do the camera tools, you can add motion blur. But this would be very nice to show you, but my PC specifically can't handle motion blur, so I'm not going to show you because I want all of this to work still. So if you use this, you can use it. It has some pretty cool effects, but be careful because it could make your PC crash. At least it did for me. This one adds a border. This one is red. I don't really know if you can see it. It's a pretty fine border. Don't really know why you would want that, but now sepia. I think I have it in a very low state right now, but most of you probably, if you ever had a camera or something, you probably know what sepia does. It's that like old effect that lets the image appear in different tones and shades of brown. So that's pretty cool. So here you can see, can't see it at the moment. Now you can see this is like the color, it's this reddish brown, and now we can put up the strength and everything appears in this red color. And if we put it down, it gets like less and less apparent. And surface blur, same blur effect, but this one is kind of a smarter blur effect. I don't often use blur effects because I like my images to be sharp, but if I use one, I use surface blur because it kind of stays within its own boundaries, which I think is super nice. Technicolor is also one that desaturates, which can look super cool. Another one of these, this one does more saturation in its natural setting. You can of course always like flip them, but Technicolor 1 and 2 have different settings here. Tilt shift is pretty blurry. I don't think you want that for your screen shift, for your screenshots, not shifts. Then you have tone map, which doesn't do a lot in its current setting, but here you can use a defog color, and if you choose like defog, you can kind of negate the effect that you created with the fog effects before. So Cartoon also kind of draws the edges of this building with kind of a black pencil. It of course doesn't do that literally, but I feel like that's a nice way to describe it. So the edges have this black line around them. Then you have Vignette, which makes these areas in the corners look darker. I think most of you probably know a vignette. And ASCII transforms the color into ASCII code. I don't know why you would want that for your screenshot, but if you do like a crazy hacker build, maybe that's like a nice look. And I won't do the glitch one. It also is one of these like fun ones that kind of makes it all like green and glitchy. But first of all, that I would feel sorry for my viewers that probably that have problems with like flashy colors. And also it's very hard on my PC, so I'm not going to try the glitch one. This one is also like a pretty wild one, pretty out there. And then you have night vision. So these are all some that are like out there for very, very specific use, but you won't use them that often. Nostalgia, same. It kind of looked like some old video games, maybe if you build something like that, like a Mario 1 sort of thing. You could use that, but not in your usual, like, I want to show off my Sims build as beautiful as possible. Now we've got some more blooms, so you can see like the lighting gets more extreme. And this one is, I think, my favorite. The Quint bloom is of course pretty extreme in this example here, but I have to say this one is pretty nice and soft. It has very nice and natural areas where it's appearing, so I really like this one. Now we've got another tone map, another color filter. So you can see, like, if you know one of each types, like the blurs and the sharpens and the blooms and the like edge smoothing ones. So they all are kind of, oh, also the depth of field ones, of course. So they all fall into different categories, and but they have slightly different things that you can do with them down here. So different options basically. And I hope I was able to tell you something and not bore you out completely. I hope that's going to help you make the most beautiful reshaders, and also, like, I'm always open to see what you do with this new information, if it's new for you, and yeah, have fun playing around with Reshade and making your Sims build look as beautiful as they deserve. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked and enjoyed this video. If you would consider subscribing, you would make me super duper happy. I hope we'll see each other again.